sometimes just feel that you're kind of up against impossible odds if you're trying to change a policy, maybe in your school or your county or something, and it just seems like you're up against the people with big money, big power, big influence, and that you're just kind of small and you can't do anything about it? Well, a lot of people have been that way. But don't worry, there's still a lot of people who have stood up against the odds and come through, and they still are. We're talking wins, we are talking successes. I'm very excited to be speaking with Brian Camenker, who is the director of an organization called Mass Resistance. If that sounds like a leftist organization, well, yeah, it does sound like a leftist organization. This guy's smart. He knows how the left works. He knows how socialists work, how they push, how they take control, how they've been indoctrinating children and sexualizing children through education. And he's learned their strategies, and he's using them for good purpose and in good ways, without compromising, without needing to follow those socialist communist rules of lying, but really using the truth against the house of cards, as he calls it. And I have to say, I do agree. We are talking standing up against the bullies, standing up against fear for good purpose. You've got this, and Brian's going to show you how. Stay tuned. You are watching the Today with Kay show, and I'm Kay Rubacek. How is your coffee supply? Is your coffee really 100% organic and roasted right here in the US? Well, Freedom First Coffee is. It's a gourmet coffee roasted in Victorian-era roasters in the heartland of the USA. Their tagline is, "Tastes like freedom." I do not know what freedom flavor exactly really is, but I can say it tastes great. I drink it myself. I would like to invite you to give it a try. Go to freedomfirstcoffee.com. That's freedomfirstcoffee.com. Use the promo code K, K-A-Y, for a discount, and that will also support this show. I like to say we vote with our dollars, so buying your coffee from Freedom First Coffee is a delicious way to vote for freedom. And if you already have your own favorite coffee supply, don't worry, because you can buy me a coffee. Go to my website, kayrubacek.com. That's KAYRUBACEK.com. And there you can actually download my latest book for free. It's called Nowhere Left to Run, 10 Steps to Survive Tyranny Today. I wanted to put that out for free, and that's why I added the Coffee with Kay button, where you can buy me a virtual coffee to help me keep being able to put out more content like this. I appreciate you all for all the support that you've given me and all the encouragement. It helps me keep going, and I hope that I can do the same for you too. What you do, analysis, tools, and strategies for citizens and activists everywhere. You are hands-on. You're not just talking theory. You're actually putting into action, the theory. Can you tell us what is your organization, Mass Resistance, trying to achieve now, and how far it's come from its founding in 1995?
The organization almost got founded by accident. Back in 1993, I began becoming aware of what they were pushing in the schools back then when my daughter was in first grade. And it was absolutely horrible. I mean, they were pushing, homosexual issues in the sixth grade and the elementary school that were ghastly. I mean, beyond anything I'd ever seen. And when I tried to discuss this with the school board, they were extremely hostile and treated me just horribly. And it's interesting, because had they said to me instead, "Oh, Mr. Camenker, we can see that this is disturbing stuff. We'll do something about it," I would have just gone away. And even if they hadn't done anything, but no, they chose to be very hostile. They bash me in the newspaper. It was very strange because all I was doing was questioning some of the things that were going on at a school board meeting. And what we did is I formed a parents group in that town, Newton, Massachusetts, and we ran school board members, and oh boy, did that anger the other side. We became a statewide organization because so many people had heard of us. And in the 1994 and 1995, we pushed a bill in the Massachusetts legislature on parental notification. And that got a tremendous amount of support from people. And it was very interesting because the House of Representatives wanted nothing to do with it, the Senate wanted nothing to do with it, and the governor had no interest in it at all. But it passed the Senate and it passed the House, and the governor reluctantly signed it. And it's still state law because of the outrage of the people. I mean, we had these mothers with little kids in the state house screaming at their state reps, and on the very last day of the session, they passed it. And as I said, it's still state law.
A lot of people are now up in arms about sexualization of children in schools, but you're talking about this in 1995. So you've been seeing this happen for a long time. Now, what were you pushing for in terms of like parental notification? What was in that bill?
Well, when we look back at it now, we were sort of naive because we couldn't foresee all of the horrible things that were about to come. But what it basically says is that if you're going to be teaching human sexuality or human sexuality issues, you have to notify the parents and allow them to opt out. I mean, you'd think that would be,
it seems reasonable,
not a contentious thing, but the Planned Parenthood and the gay groups and the left treated it like the Nazis were marching into town, and it was a terrible fight. They called us every name in the book. But as I said, we organized people around the state. A local conservative radio station started broadcasting from the State House as we were lobbying in those final days. And we got it passed. But so that's really all it is. It's a very rather modest bill by today's standards, but it does allow notification and opt out, and it's still state law. The other side has tried to repeal it numerous times, and we've successfully fought that back each time. And now we're pretty much nationwide. I mean, we started out in Massachusetts, but now we have far more activists in places like California and Texas than Massachusetts. And we even have chapters in numerous foreign countries, from Australia to the UK to Nigeria and Hong Kong of all places.
So what were you doing before this, Brian? You said you were a father and this is what got you involved in this organization. Were you an activist before this? What were you doing?
No, I wasn't an activist. I was actually in the software industry. I was a computer programmer. When I started out, I knew nothing about this. And we did a lot of stuff wrong. And we accidentally did things right. And, after a while, we sort of built on that. And I'm seeing with a lot of these groups that are forming now is most of the people that are doing it are where I was in the early 1990s. They really didn't know what they were up against. They didn't know how to fight it. And they just sort of do what their intuition and common sense tells them to. But like many other endeavors in life, what is obvious and intuitive is not how it really works, and particularly in this. And the left has been doing this for 70 years, these kind of activism. And conservatives, this is another whole interesting topic, generally have little interest in this kind of organizing. So we think of ourselves as unusual in that we've been building on that And that's, that's what we do now around the country.
Organizing is a term typically used by communist groups, right? Where they organize groups and activists to push for change, and they keep pushing and pushing. These are tactics and strategies of communist members, and that's Marxism, socialism, all of those things I like to use interchangeably because to me, they all have the same root. And really, organizing is at the core of how they've been able to change legislation
Right.
and really operate at a grassroots level, not just at a federal or state level. And what have you learned, and what do you think people around the nation should be learning from organizers from the left, and how to actually use that for good purpose?
Well, I think the general thing about organizing on the left that we can learn from is that they think through strategies and tactics, and they understand what their goal is, and they work toward that goal. Now, they they work differently than we should work, or can effectively work, because the left uses lies and deceit all the time. Everything about what they do is basically lies and deceit. And not only should we not do that, but it doesn't work for our side. What works for our side is telling the truth. And so that part of the paradigm is different. But the part of the paradigm that we need to understand is we have to visualize what the goal is in each of the things that we're doing, and think through the steps that it takes to do the goal. As an example, a lot of people get angry at their school boards for having some teaching or bad books or what have you. And so they go and they scream at the school boards. Well, it may well be that the school boards really don't have the direct power to stop these things. It's the superintendent that they hire. And so what you have to do is find out where the power comes and who's pushing the superintendent. Maybe it's the teachers union. And so maybe those are the people you have to go after. And similarly, if the board actually does have the power to do these things, going and screaming at the board does less is less effective unless you do what the left does. What the left does is they don't just come in and say, we want you to have a gay straight alliance in the school. They craft a motion for them to bring up, and they do it, and they make sure that it works right in the way everything else works, and then they pressure them to vote for that motion. Our people never think of that, you know. And what they don't understand is that most of these people on the board wouldn't think of that either if we demanded of. They're not as smart as we think they are most of the time. In fact, almost all of the time. And I can get that's an interesting thing. So you have to, if you want something to be accomplished, you have to think, well, how does it get accomplished, and then let's make it happen. We have purposefully named ourselves not a positive name. We're not like, the group for the families, or
Yeah, it sounds like a communist term, mass resistance.
yeah, and that is not by accident. In fact, actually, one of our activists came up with that name, and I didn't like it at first, but that's what we're doing. I mean, we are not trying to support or build the family, even though, I mean, the family should be supported and built. What we are trying to do is stop the people who are trying to subvert our society. And so thus the name mass resistance. Um,
I, I like that. That's something that really struck me about your organization is the fact that you have a name that has, that type of term is typically found in leftist socialist organizations. But the fact that you're utilizing that says to me that you understand what you're doing and you understand what you're up against. And I think that's really
oh,
important
thank
because
you.
too often we get afraid of what we don't understand, and we feel that we can't get too close to it because it it may burn us. But I think you're onto something with this. Am
Well,
I
thank
right?
you. Yeah, and it actually to us came to the America's founding fathers. I mean, it was Thomas Jefferson that said, in every generation, something like the streets must flow with the blood of tyrants or something like that. Now, we're not suggesting that we go out and fill the streets with the blood of tyrants, but what he was saying is that unless you resist the the efforts of bad people, you're going to have problems in every generation.
Friends, you are listening to an interview with Brian Camenker from Mass Resistance. We're going to come back in just a minute. You're not going to want to miss what he has to say. There's a lot to learn from his more than 20 years of doing this. If you've just started waking up and realizing some things are going on around you that are not what you expected or not what you want for your family, don't worry. There's people who have been doing this for a long time and we can learn from each other. Stay tuned. You are watching the Today with Kay show. I'm Kay Rubacek. Gold, 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 gold. Have you heard that before? If you haven't been paying attention. We are heading into a recession. It is inevitable. It is a really serious financial crisis. Many people have known this is coming for a long time. The financial analysts who are finally actually talking about it are saying it's going to be a lot worse than they expected. They knew it was coming. Come on. But are you prepared? If you are not, it's not too late. If you want to use gold as a way to secure your assets, you need to talk to someone you can trust, someone who knows the financial industry. Don't talk to a podcaster like me. I know communism and socialism, and I know the economics of that, but I don't know how to invest in gold. You got to talk to an expert. I trust Ira at ourgoldguy.com. Do whatever you can to protect yourself for the upcoming financial crisis. You've got an idea of what's coming. No one knows exactly how bad it's going to be, but now is the time to prepare. Go to ourgoldguy.com, talk to Ira, and mention my name, Kay. You know, when you mention bad people, I really feel there's a lot of people that don't want to accept or aren't willing to believe that there are people who want to hurt them and want to hurt their communities and want to hurt their children. And I think plays a big role in just this whole challenge of holding on to our values, because it's hard for some people to accept that really, whether they're bad people or just co-opted in some ways, there are people who are trying to hurt us. Isn't that right?
Oh, oh, definitely. When you sit down with a person and you explain to that person how pornography hurts a young child for life, and then the person goes out and does it anyway, there's a big problem there. And we've done that. We've done that a lot. These are people who, I mean, who basically know what they're doing. It's and they do it anyway. And I've run into that over and over and over and over again. I think it probably goes back to a lot of the things that you talk about in totalitarian societies. The people that do these mass murderers, the people that do this, they're bad things. They're obviously bad things, and bad people are doing them. And you're right. One of the big problems we have is getting our side to believe that everybody isn't like us. And normal people don't push terrible pornography on young children. Normal people don't do so many of these things. Normal people don't suggest that a girl should have her breasts cut off. And, so yes, that's a big problem is our people. There's a lot of things that we have problems with our people because they're so normal. And they, we've had a lot of successes on state legislature levels where they the other side will bring in a bill to do horrible things, and it's on the verge of passing, and we will get it stopped. And we have done that all over the country. I mean, I told you that our parental notification law has never been repealed. I mean, every year Planned Parenthood comes up with some reason to repeal it. And they have press conferences and they do all this stuff.
When you say horrible, could you just give a little bit more of a description so that the listeners understand?
Uh, Horrible meaning explicit sex, very explicit sex and homosexuality. Uh, Here are all the ways to have homosexual sex. Here are all the ways to have regular sex. And then just, um, you know, giving kids just bad messages about sexual issues and drug issues and things like that. Planned Parenthood has these sex ed courses all put together, and they persuade these school districts to take them on, and so they're very well planned out, and they're just they're toxic and horrible. And so this district passed it overwhelmingly, and it was a somewhat of a challenge because it was a very large sort of minority district, mostly blacks and Hispanics and Chinese immigrants, and we organized those people, and the school board were all like white, and so they didn't really connect with their constituencies, but they were good at winning elections. Well, they got so much pushback that they repealed it, and they haven't replaced it with anything since. And it's been, I don't know, a year or so. In all these years, we've been able to do a lot of that stuff. We got the county commission in Gillette, Wyoming, to basically uh, uh, appoint a completely new conservative library board, replacing the liberals after a lot of pressure there. Library boards control the library. The library it's a weird process, but in there and what the first thing that this new library board did was pull the library out of the American Library Association, which is a big deal.
So that's a national organization that a lot of school libraries are a part of.
Pretty much everybody. I would say almost every public library and most of the public school libraries. And it is, you think of the American Library Association, you think of this sort of, conservative-ish group that probably helps librarians do stuff. But it's just the opposite. If you go to their website, it's all, covered with LGBT stuff and, you know, what they call freedom to read. Freedom to read is the freedom of kids to read pornography against their parents' wishes.
Curation is everything, right? We see that with media. Which headlines make the front page of any news organization? In art museums, in library, which books make it to the front shelf? Which ones are encouraged in the children's corner for people to read? That curation process happens by someone who has a level of power. So, friends out there watching or listening, don't underestimate the power of your library and its curator. So, Brian, you've taken on some pretty heavy hitters there when you talk about Planned Parenthood, which has, very large funding sources behind it, and then you're also talking about libraries, which definitely operating at a much smaller scale. Do you need different strategies to approach these different groups, or is there sort of some sort of guiding principles that you use when you're approaching a new challenge?
It's not a cookie cutter approach. It's not just going up and complaining. You have to think through what's happening, how is this happening, what's the power behind it, a lot of things, and a lot of things that our side just doesn't think of, and then figure out how to solve it. Yeah, that's what the left does. That's one of the reasons why they're so successful. And it's a constant aggravation that people on our side aren't interested in that level of detail.
We're trying to cut corners all the time, aren't we? Or
Yeah,
we want someone else to do it for us.
right. I mean, a lot of the really smart people on our side don't want to get involved with this kind of thing and don't have the experience. I mean, if I wanted to fill a room with people, like-minded people with this kind of organizing experience to do larger projects, I wouldn't really know who to call, because the people that I would call are too busy, like, you know, being on Tucker Carlson or something, to want to do this. Uh, and very few people have been doing this for, organized people. But the left, this is what they do. This is what they breathe, this kind of stuff. And so for us to beat them, we we have to understand that, and I think we can beat them. But it's it's an interesting challenge, that's for sure.
You faced criticism, attacks, and all sorts of name calling, as you said. How do you develop that sort of thick skin to continue through that? Because I think that that's part of the big reason that people are actually more afraid of that. They're more afraid of their own reputation and being criticized publicly or being misassociated wrongly with some term that the left is so great
Oh,
at putting
right.
labels on people. People are really afraid of that, instead of having that fire in the belly to get passionate about your kids or whatever it is, and what you believe in, and speaking out about it. How do you deal with
Yeah.
that?
I mean, yeah, we get, I mean, if you look us up, I mean, the first thing you'll see is that the Southern Poverty Law Center is a far left organization, calls us a hate group, and all of that nonsense. We get a lot less uh, personal hassle than other people do. Uh, and I think that there's a psychological thing with the left, that when they figure out that you're not afraid of them, they tend to back off. They're classic bullies, in the sense that if they think that you're afraid of them, they will just be vicious. But when you stomp back at them, they get relatively mild, and that's what we try to show people. That it's a paper tiger in many ways, and even when it's not, this is something you can't just back off of this. I mean, I guess I'm old enough to where, when I was a little kid, all of the fathers had fought in World War II. My father-in-law was in the Battle of the Bulge. Uh, those guys, I guess, were different. They came back, and they didn't care about that stuff. I mean, they weren't afraid of people calling them names.
How are you looking at this as a fight, just to help others understand how you're looking at this? Because I don't think everyone else is seeing it in the same way.
I think that introductory paragraph of your book says a lot, in that this isn't just, a bunch of people who happen to be pushing something in the schools that that we don't like. They are purposefully trying to subvert all of society. And you cannot reason with these people. They're very vicious, they're very nasty. I don't think our people understand that this isn't going to end until one side wins and the other side loses. It's sort of like the American Civil War, where Abraham Lincoln basically said that it's this isn't something that we're going to be able to resolve by sitting down and talking about it, because one side doesn't want to talk about it. We're different from a lot of people in that we don't encourage people, like, if there's bad books in the libraries or the school libraries, to fill out one of those forms, to challenge the books, which parents all love to do. Because we say, no, don't do that, because those forms are designed by the American Library Association to be bureaucratic, and the people that judge them are the people that put the books in anyway. So you lose 100% of the time. What you need to do is get the people out who put the books there, who think that those are good, because whoever put them in should not be working in a library for children, maybe in a porn library or something. It's different than a lot of people are used to, but we've had a lot of success. It means introducing a certain state of mind that people aren't used to, and I'm sure that's been a problem all the way up and down in fights against totalitarian regimes. Now, one thing I wanted to maybe ask you, which in the fight against totalitarianism, this is an unusual time because we have the internet. You know, in Nazi Germany or in communist China or in Cuba or any of those places, they basically didn't have that. So the other side really didn't know what was going on the way our people sort of do. But I think that the internet has also had a bad effect in that rather than forming a resistance like they did in Europe in World War II and all of these places, people think that if they just forward a bunch of emails around, that's sufficient. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. It's like if we just click the like button and change our icon to say I support you, then I've done my civic duty. Yes, I so much agree because so many people say to me, well, communism in the past isn't like, we don't see the totalitarianism that we saw, say, under Soviet
Mhm.
times or during Mao Zedong's rule in China. We don't see that today. No, because of the internet. That's a huge part of it. I think you're right on point with that. And because of that technology, which this international socialist movement has just capitalized on and working together
Mhm.
with big money and other supporters, financial supporters to back what they're doing, it just means that they've been able to really dumb us down to the point where, like using these tools, where we start to think very short term. I
Mhm.
talk in my book about using these small screens and how we just read headlines. If that, we might just see a video and maybe read a bit of text, but then we scroll to the next thing. So our brains are not regularly processing information in the same way that they were, that people did, say, in the 80s before the fall of the Berlin Wall, when everyone was resisting together and trying to find any way. I mean, we were dropping leaflets of information behind the Berlin Wall to get real information to people, whereas now we have a virtual wall being controlled by big media organizations that are working with big government and big corporate money and big tech, all working together. And so we are being divided through this big media wall. So tech plays such a big part of it, and it dumbs us down. It makes us think we just click like and we're done, all good. But it makes us forget that we have a civic duty. We are being dumbed down by these advertisements and constant barrage of people feeding us, right? We have a feed. They feed us information. And if we just accept that, then we are no longer critically thinking about what we consume. And so I think it's rather unhealthy if you compare it to a diet, because I think our media diet is very, very important for our well-being, our mental state, our ability to serve our civic duty in society. And thank you for asking me a question. That's really fun, actually, to make me think. I'm totally unprepared for that, but that's great because this is. I think the discussion is what we need. You do come across as a software engineer. I got to say, I'm trying to imagine you out there yelling and screaming at the school board meetings and getting all angry and fired up at the librarians.
You don't really need to scream at them. As long as you are forceful in your conversation, you can be very, you can be modulated, shall I say. Um, I always tell people to do what is comfortable for them. I mean, there's a lot of pro-family groups that won't let people scream because, oh well, it's going to look bad. We're going to look like a bunch of, you know, fanatics and all of that. I say to people, do what's comfortable for you. And some people are comfortable doing that. Other people are comfortable saying the same thing in a calmer tone, and that has the same effect. You know, what we would prefer people not to do is just be wimpy about it and overly respectful. You know, most of these public officials are are basically they're basically dorks. They're basically these people who happen to run for an office and win and just get a real thrill out of this political power on a local level. And you know, they're just one election away from going back to being nobody. And we all look at them like God put his finger on their head and said, you're going to rule the town or something. But no, it's not like that at all. Most of these people are very average or worse. And I encourage people to take that into consideration.
I especially like that you talked about how your organization is not afraid. And I think that is something that we all need to really learn from. I do talk about that in my book. If you haven't downloaded it, please go to my website, kayrubacek.com, and download Nowhere Left to Run, 10 Steps to Survive Tyranny Today. It's through writing that book that I was able to connect with Brian and have this wonderful conversation. So please go and download it and send me your thoughts on the book as well. I'd really appreciate that. And in my book, Brian, I do talk about fear and really standing up to the bullies and seeing them as bullies and not putting them on that pedestal that they are expecting of us and trying to make us think that there's such a vast space between that human being and me as a fellow human being. So any final closing words for the audience to give them more courage to face their fears of, the big scary bullies?
Well, I believe that this whole thing is a house of cards. That is, if it weren't for a lot of money and a lot of, influence and media power and everything, it couldn't stand. And our job is to tear down the house of cards, but that's what it is. We need to do it before it gets too entrenched, but that's what it is. And so I think people need to get into the fight, and it can be a lot of fun too. That's what I also say is it's not all, aggravation. It's doing good is a lot of fun.
Oh, I love that. Leaving on a hopeful note. Friends, go to Brian's website, massresistance.org. And remember, keep that in mind. House of cards. What are you going to do about it? Do something before that it gets too entrenched. And you can have a smile while doing it. I love to remind people of that. This isn't all doom and gloom. You can get together with friends and we can go forward with positivity, with a smile. We need that. We need that strength. We need to work together and we need to overcome the fear that's being pushed into us because maybe the bullies aren't so scary, especially when they know that we don't fear them. That's when they run away. I can say that from my own personal experience too. I like to say the louder we are, the safer we are. Have no fear and go forward with a good heart. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. I really appreciate you. I hope you enjoyed this interview. I certainly did. Go and click the like, subscribe, share, and all of those things you need to do. If you're listening on the podcasts, there's a review button. Click the 5-star review or nothing. It's kind of not worth doing anything in between because it only likes the 5-star. Anything less than that, they won't promote it. So I will never be offended if you give me less than 5 stars, but I would really appreciate the 5-star if you want to click that button. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you again next time.